The fire had already gone cold by the time the egg cracked. Not the warm fire of a nest, the cold, dead kind, ash and smoke, and the smell of something that had been alive and was not anymore. The shell broke from the inside. A small claw punched through first, then another. Then a head, covered in membrane and soot, pushed out into a world that had already decided it did not want him in it. He fell from the crack in the rock where the egg had rolled during the bombardment. He landed in ash. He lifted his head and looked around. Nothing moved. The nesting grounds of Cororoman 4, a moon that had once been loud with the sounds of dragons, were silent. Craters where nests had been. Scorch marks in the stone that were deeper and wider than any dragon flame could make. Military grade, precise. This was not a battle. This was a cleaning operation. He had no name yet. He was 3 minutes old. But dragons are not born empty. In the coil of memory that lives in the blood, he had his parents, not their voices, not their faces, but the shape of what they knew. A library written in instinct. He did not need anyone to explain what he was looking at. He understood. His nest was gone. His family was gone. He sat in the ash and made no sound. There was no one to hear him. He tried to breathe fire, a hatching instinct, the first test of what he was, and what came out was a small, weak flicker, orange and barely warm. A birthday candle over a grave. He was hungry, he was cold, he did not know what came next. For 2 days he stayed close to the ruins of the nest, eating what insects and small creatures he could find in the broken stone. He grew a little. The flicker of fire grew a little too. On the 3rd day he climbed to the top of a ridge and looked at the sky and understood, in the wordless way that newborns understand things, that no one was coming. The salvage crew arrived on the 4th day. He heard the ship before he saw it, a deep mechanical hum that the echo memory in his blood recognized as not natural, not safe. He hid. He was small enough to hide in a crack in the stone, and he did, and he watched through yellow eyes as 6 figures in gray suits moved across the ruins below him. They were not his kind. They were tall and thin, with 4 arms and pale skin that caught the light wrong. Dravari, the word surfaced in his inherited memory with no emotion attached, just a shape, a category, a fact of the world. They moved through the ruins with scanners. They were not looking for survivors. They were cataloging bone fragments and scale shards for material extraction. Dragon remains had energy value. This was a mining operation dressed as a recovery mission. One of them stopped directly below the crack where he was hiding. He pressed himself flat and did not breathe. The scanner in the figure's hand made a sound, a fast, rising tone, and the figure looked up. They stared at each other. He was the size of a large dog. His scales were gold with streaks of deep blue, still bright despite the ash he was covered in. His eyes were amber. He was, by any measure, the rarest living thing in the sector. He bolted. He was fast for his size, but the Dravari were faster in coordination. 2 cut off his path. 1 came from behind. He spun and breathed fire, real fire this time, larger than before, hot enough to blister, and one of them scrambled back. But they had nets, not physical nets. Frequency-based containment fields that locked around him like invisible walls that got smaller. He fought until his flame ran out. Then he was too exhausted to fight anymore. They sedated him with a handheld emitter, a beam of sound at a frequency that dragons could not resist. He felt his legs go. He fought it. He lost. The last thing he saw before everything went dark was the sky above Cororoman 4, clear and pale and enormous. Somewhere in the echo memory, a voice he had never heard with his own ears, his mother's, had described a sky exactly like that one. She had called it the best part of being alive, the part that made everything else make sense. He did not cry. He was too young to know how. He went dark. When he woke, he was in a box made of metal and transparent alloy, and the sky was gone, and there were hundreds of alien faces on the other side of the glass, and none of them were looking at him like he was alive. They were looking at him like he was valuable. He pressed himself into the corner of the box and was very, very still, and began, in the silence of his own mind, to learn everything he could about the place he was in, because he was going to need it. His name, he decided, was Solyun. It was the first word he thought in his own voice rather than his parents' memory. It meant, in the old tongue, the one who stayed. Nobody on Station Vel 9 called him Solyun. They called him Asset Draconis 1. It was printed on the containment cell door in 3 languages. It was how Director Nav referred to him in every report, every briefing, every quiet conversation held on the other side of the glass, while Solyun sat and listened and pretended not to understand a single word. He understood most of them, not at first, but the echo memory in his blood held fragments of language from his ancestors, old dragons, who had lived long enough to learn the tongues of other species. Standard Galactic came back to him in pieces, like remembering something he had been taught before he was born. He picked up the gaps from the station broadcasts that ran through the walls at all hours. Within 2 weeks, he could follow most conversations. He did not speak, not yet. The cell was clean, at least, temperature-controlled. He was fed twice a day raw protein packs that tasted like nothing but filled the hunger. The Dravari were not cruel in any obvious way. They did not hit him or shout at him. They simply did not consider whether he had feelings about any of it. An expensive piece of equipment, properly maintained. That was all. Director Nav ran the conditioning sessions every other day. Nav was tall even for a Dravari, with a calm face that never shifted much no matter what was happening. He spoke in the precise, careful way of someone who had spent a long time deciding exactly which words to use. The sessions worked like this: images on the walls of the cell, human warships, human soldiers, human cities, and alongside the images, stimuli, sound frequencies that caused pain or nausea or the low animal dread that lived below thought. Nav was trying to link the image of humans to the feeling of threat, build a simple machine in Solyun's mind. See human, feel enemy, act accordingly. Solyun sat through the sessions and gave Nav exactly enough of a stress response to look like the conditioning was working. He was not sure why he did this. Some instinct from the blood, maybe. Stay small, stay quiet, learn more before you decide anything. On the 19th day, the side door of the containment wing opened during the off-cycle. A human walked in. Solyun had seen humans in the conditioning feeds. He had seen them as Nav wanted him to see them, armored, armed, advancing. He had looked at them the way you look at an enemy in a lesson. This one was carrying a cleaning tool and a small bag of equipment. He was not armored. He wore a gray maintenance suit with a small crew number stitched on the shoulder. He was not tall. He had the look of someone who did not get enough sleep, but had made peace with it. He moved to the filtration panel on the far wall and opened it without looking at Solyun. Solyun watched him. The human worked in silence for a few minutes. Then he closed the panel and turned to gather his tools, and his eyes went to the containment cell the way eyes do when something in the room is impossible to ignore. He looked at Solyun. Solyun looked back. The human did not reach for anything, did not call out, did not step backward. He said in Standard Galactic, in a voice that was not loud, "That looks cold in there. Sorry about that. I'd turn up the heat if I could find the panel." He looked mildly embarrassed, the way people do when they realize they just spoke to something that probably cannot answer them. He bent down, picked up a ration pack from his bag, and set it on the shelf of the feeding slot. Not his job, not required, just a thing he did. Then he left. Solyun sat very still for a long time. He looked at the ration pack. He looked at the door the human had gone through. He looked at the place where the human had stood. In all 19 days of captivity, every Dravari who had come into this wing had spoken about him or around him or through him. Not one had spoken to him. Not even Nav, who was the most intelligent of them. Nav spoke at him, the way you speak a command at a machine. The human had spoken to him like there might be someone listening. Solyun did not eat the ration pack immediately. He sat with it for an hour, then he ate it. Then he moved slowly, without making it obvious, to the corner of the cell that was closest to the door the human had used, and he curled there, and he slept better than he had since the ship. 3 levels up, Director Nav reviewed his evening biometrics and frowned. The stress readings had dropped by 31%. There had been no session that evening, no stimulus, no change in routine that Nav's logs could account for. Unknown variable, the system flagged it. Nav ordered a review of all personnel who had entered the containment wing in the past 24 hours. On the maintenance crew manifest, one name came back as having been in the wing during off-cycle hours. Owen, crew number 714, human, maintenance technician, 3rd class. Nav noted it, then moved on, because what could a maintenance worker possibly have done that mattered? In the cell below, Solyun was already awake again, listening to the station's night cycle hum through the walls, and thinking about a voice that had sounded, for the first time since Cororoman 4, like it thought he was real. Owen came back. He came back the next cycle, and the one after, because the filtration systems in the containment wing needed calibration every 48 hours, and that was his assigned route. He had not planned to do anything different. He had spoken to the dragon the first time because the silence felt wrong, not because he had a strategy. The second visit, he replaced a pressure valve near the east wall, said, "Looks like you grew a little since last week," and left a second ration pack at the feeding slot. The third visit, he adjusted a coolant line, glanced at the cell, and said, "Still cold in there, I bet. I keep telling them the climate settings in this wing are off. Nobody listens to maintenance." He paused. Nobody ever does. On the fourth visit, Solyun spoke. Owen had his back to the cell, tightening a bolt on a wall panel. The voice was rough, the sound of something working through a language for the first time with a mouth not built for it. One word, careful and low. "Warmer." Owen stopped. He did not spin around. He did not shout. He was quiet for a full 3 seconds, and then he said, in the same even tone he used for everything, "Oh, good, I finally found the thermal panel." He turned around slowly. Solyun was watching him from the center of the cell. The amber eyes were steady, testing. Owen nodded once, the way you nod when something makes sense. Then he finished tightening the bolt. After that, the conversations grew the way things grow when nobody pushes them, slowly, with a lot of silence in between. Owen asked questions that did not need answers. Solyun gave answers anyway, 1 or 2 words at first, then more. Standard Galactic was coming back faster now, fed by the broadcasts and the listening and these small exchanges that were the only thing on the station that felt like a real thing. Owen told him ordinary things. He complained about shift rotations. He talked about a moon he had grown up on that had red clay soil and rivers that flooded every spring. He said his sister had loved the floods. He said she was gone now, and he did not explain further, and Solyun did not ask. Solyun told him very little about himself, but he asked questions about humans, about what they were like when nobody was watching. Owen answered straight, not the way someone answers when they want to seem good, but the way someone answers when they are tired of making things sound better than they are. He said humans had done terrible things in wars. He said humans had bombed places that should never have been touched. He also said most humans were not the kind who made those decisions. They were the kind who cleaned the filtration systems and tried to get home. One evening, Owen sat on a crate for longer than his maintenance schedule required. He had something on his mind, and he was not sure how to say it. He said, "Can I ask you something that's probably none of my business?" Solyun waited. "Do you know what happened to wherever you came from?" Solyun was quiet for a moment. "I know it is gone." "Do you know why?" "I am supposed to think it was humans." Owen went very still. "Supposed to." "That is what the sessions show me," Solyun said. "Images, pane next to the images. They want me to decide humans did it." "But you don't." "I listen to many things on this station," Solyun said. "Director Nav speaks without care when he thinks I do not understand. I understand most things now." Owen stared at the floor for a long time. Then he did something he should not have done. He went back to his crew quarters that night and used a technician override code, a maintenance access he had for ventilation system records, to pull up Solyun's full case file. it was not hard to find. The security on it was not built for someone curious from inside the station's own systems, only for intrusion from outside. He read it in one sitting. His hands were flat on the table when he finished, not moving. The words nest purge, false flag attribution, human military framing sat in a line in the middle of a strategic planning document like something completely ordinary. A tool, a decision made in a room by people who counted Solyun as a variable in an equation. Owen sat with it for an hour, then he went back to the containment wing. This was not his scheduled time. It was a violation of access protocol. He went anyway. He walked up to the cell. He pressed one hand flat against the containment glass. He said, "Someone lied to you about who burned your family. I don't know what to do about it yet, but I thought you should know that I know." Solyun crossed the cell slowly and pressed one small clawed foot against the glass from the inside. 3 inches of transparent alloy between them. The first time anything on this station had touched him with something that was not a scanner or a sedation beam. Neither of them said anything else. Then an alarm sounded, soft, internal, the kind that does not ring in the corridors but lights up on security screens. Owen's unauthorized file access had been flagged. He looked at Solyun. Solyun looked at him. "Go," Solyun said, one word, like he had been practicing it for exactly this moment. Owen went. They held Owen for 6 hours in a small room near the security station. The questioning was polite in the way that things are polite when the person asking does not yet know how angry to be. He said he had accessed the case file by accident, wrong directory path, while looking for ventilation maintenance logs. He said he had not read it carefully. He said he had not spoken to the asset. He answered everything in the flat, unhurried voice of someone who had decided on his story and was going to stay with it. They had no evidence of what he had said to Solyun. The cell had audio monitoring, but it ran on a recording cycle, not live observation, and the logs from that particular hour had not yet been pulled. Owen was confined to crew quarters pending review. In the containment wing, Solyun noticed the absence. He stopped eating on the second day. He sat in the middle of the cell and was still in a way that the Dravari monitoring staff recognized as a problem. His biometrics climbed, not rage indicators, which they understood, but something more diffuse. The systems flagged it as psychological stress, loss response patterns, the kind of thing that damaged conditioning pathways. Director Nav moved up the conditioning schedule. Solyun was transferred to the active chamber, a larger room where the image feeds covered all 4 walls and the stimulus system had more range. Nav stood in the observation room above and watched through the glass as the session began. The walls filled with human warships, human soldiers in formation, burning stations in the footage from old battles, and the stimulus underneath it, the deep frequency that worked below thought, the one that made the stomach clench and the chest tight and the mind want to run. It had worked before. In the early sessions, Solyun's readings had shown exactly the kind of response Nav needed, fear linked to the visual, aggression rising in response, the equation being written. But today, the readings were wrong. Solyun sat in the middle of the chamber and looked at the images, and the needle on the aggression monitor barely moved. The fear response was present, but it was not pointing at the footage. It was pointing somewhere else, at something Nav could not see. Then Solyun began to speak. Not standard galactic, something older, a language that moved in the back of the throat, that had no written form in any Dravari database. The linguist on duty pulled up analysis software and got nothing back but waveform data. No translation, no matches. Nav watched Solyun's mouth move and heard sounds that meant nothing to him, and felt, for the first time since this project began, the specific unease of not being in control of a situation he had thought he fully understood. Solyun was not speaking to Nav. He was speaking to his parents. He was using the echo memory, not drawing from it, but speaking into it, the way you speak to someone who cannot hear you anymore, but you say the words anyway because the words matter. He was telling them what had happened, what he had learned, what he was deciding. He decided something in that chamber. The conditioning session ended with inconclusive results. Nav logged it as subject resistance, elevated cognitive complexity, potential non-standard neural pathway development. In plain terms, the dragon was thinking too much and it was interfering with the program. 3 corridors away, in her private office, Councillor Rith was reading Owen's personnel file. Rith was not military. She was a political appointee, technically there to oversee ethical compliance on long-term research projects, a position that had been largely decorative for years. She had known about the conditioning program. She had filed 2 objections that went nowhere. She had been waiting for something she could actually use. She made a call, a quiet one. She arranged for Owen's room access terminal to receive a one-time secondary connection to the monitoring room feed, deniable, traceable only to a server that would be reset in 48 hours. Owen sat in his quarters and watched the conditioning session footage on a small secondary screen that had no business showing him what it was showing him. He watched Solyun sit in the middle of that room, surrounded by images designed to make him hate and refuse. He watched what refusing cost Solyun in that room, the readings that Owen could not interpret but whose direction was clear enough. He saw a child being told, over and over, who his enemy was, and the child saying no. Owen opened a formal crew welfare complaint. He used a specific clause, Article 7 of Dravari Station Operating Law, Welfare of Sapient Beings under Research Conditions. He had looked it up 2 days ago, when he was confined to quarters with nothing else to do. The article required that any sapient being exhibiting communication, self-determination, or grief response behaviors had to be assessed by an independent observer before research continued. It created a mandatory 48-hour hold. It would not free Solyun. It was not a rescue. It was a 48-hour delay filed by a maintenance worker that nobody had ever thought about twice. Director Nav came to Owen's quarters personally to tell him what he had done. Nav stood in the doorway, calm as always, and said, "You have delayed an operation of Dominion significance. You have no idea what that creature is capable of. You think kindness to a weapon changes what it is." Owen was sitting on the edge of his bunk. He looked up. "He isn't a weapon," Owen said. "He's a kid who hasn't decided yet what he's going to do with the rest of his life, and I think that matters." Nav said nothing to that. He left. Owen sat alone in the quiet. He did not know if anything he had done would amount to anything. He had bought 48 hours, that was all. He looked at the wall of his quarters and thought about his sister, who had also once thought that small things mattered. In the containment wing below, Solyun had been returned to his cell during the hold. He lifted his head in the direction of Owen's quarters, 3 decks up and 2 wings over, and closed his eyes, and stayed very still, like he was listening for something that was not quite sound. The hold expired at the end of the 2nd day, and Admiral Dresser arrived with it. She came on a fast military transport with an escort of 6. She did not visit the containment wing first. She went straight to Nav's operations room, closed the door, and within 30 minutes, the 48-hour hold was overruled under wartime command authority. Peace talks between the Dravari Dominion and the Human Confederation had collapsed completely. War was no longer coming. War had started. And a fully conditioned dragon, pointed at human space, could end it before the human fleet even assembled. Dresser also brought Sergeant Euler. Euler was human, the last prisoner exchanged from the failed talks, being returned to human space as a diplomatic formality. She was compact and sharp-eyed and moved like someone who was always calculating the fastest way to the nearest exit. When the escort walked her through the docking corridor past the containment wing's viewing window, she stopped walking. She looked through the glass at Solyun, and she went pale. She had seen dragonfire before. A different dragon, a different war years ago. She had lost 5 people in 20 seconds and had not slept easily since. She was not wrong to be afraid. Her fear was built from real things. But the way she looked at Solyun was the way you look at a bomb that someone left in the hallway, and Solyun watched her from the cell with his head low and his eyes level, and he did not move. An escort officer pulled Euler along. She went, but she kept looking back. The reactor alarm started 4 hours later. It came from the lower decks, a monitoring failure in the secondary reactor bay that turned into a containment breach faster than the safety systems could compensate. Stations have plans for this. Blast doors seal by section, personnel route to safe zones, non-critical systems shut down to contain power flow. The containment wing was on the wrong side of blast door 7. Emergency protocol was clear: leave asset Draconis 1 in the reinforced cell. It would survive the event. Retrieve it after. Personnel evacuate first. Owen was on the right side of blast door 7 when the countdown hit 30 seconds. He stood there for 5 of those seconds. He looked at the door. He thought about 30 seconds and what it meant, and what he was going to think about for the rest of his life if he stepped back and let the door seal. He went through it. The blast door sealed behind him. He was now on the wrong side of it, with a reactor breach spreading through the lower decks and no way back. He ran to the containment wing. The lights were emergency red. The station's automated voice was saying the same 4 words over and over in 3 languages. He reached Solune's cell. No key, no access card that worked. The emergency protocols had locked all containment overrides. He stood at the glass and looked at Solune. Solune was already on his feet, watching him. "I need you to break out of here," Owen said. His voice was steady. He was surprised by that. "And I need you to not hurt anyone when you do." Solune looked at him for exactly 2 seconds. Then he turned to the side wall of the cell, not the door, not the direction of the corridor where Dravari staff sometimes stood, the side wall, which backed onto a maintenance corridor. Owen's maintenance corridor. The one Owen had cleaned every 48 hours for weeks and knew better than anyone on this station. Solune breathed fire at the wall, not a hatchling flicker. Real fire, deep gold with a blue center, the kind that had been growing inside him for weeks. The alloy did not melt cleanly, but it buckled and split and came apart in 3 seconds flat. They ran. The maintenance corridor was narrow and dark, and Owen knew every turn. They moved fast and low and came out on the near side of blast door 7, still accessible from the emergency junction, through a service hatch that no one had sealed because no one had expected anyone to use it. The personnel cluster was 40 meters down the corridor. Station staff, dressers escort, Nav and Eula all waiting for clearance to move. They heard Owen and Solune before they saw them, and then they saw them, and the reaction was immediate. Eula raised her weapon. Solune stopped. He was bigger than when she had seen him an hour ago. The broken cell wall, the run, the fire, all of it had something in him that was awake now. He was big enough that the blast from her weapon would hurt but not stop him. He did not move toward her. He stood still. Owen stepped in front of him. He did not say anything dramatic. He just stood there, between a weapon and a dragon, in a maintenance suit with a crew number stitched on the shoulder, and said, "He just saved my life. Lower the weapon." Eula did not lower it immediately. She looked past Owen. She looked at Solune. Solune was afraid. It was visible. Not rage, not hunger, the kind of afraid that has nothing to threaten and nowhere to go, just a living thing that did not want to die. Eula recognized it because she had been exactly that afraid before, in exactly the wrong moment, and no one had lowered their weapon for her. She lowered hers. The reactor breach was contained 11 minutes later. The station stabilized. The lights came back. Admiral Dresser emerged from the protected section and walked down the corridor and stopped when she saw Solune standing loose in the open, with a human beside him and the blast door behind him and no containment field anywhere. She said very quietly, "This changes nothing about the program." Solune raised his head. He spoke in standard galactic, clearly and without hesitation, loud enough that every person in the corridor heard every word. "I know what happened to my nest. I know who gave the order, and I know it was not them." The corridor went completely silent. Dresser's face did not change, which meant everything had changed. Nav took one small step backward and tried to make it look like he hadn't. The words hung in the corridor the way smoke does, quiet, spreading, impossible to put back. Dresser ordered immediate containment. She said it the way people give orders when they already know the window has closed. Two of her escort moved towards Solyun. Solyun turned to face them and did not breathe fire and did not move, but something in the way he held himself made them stop before they reached him. Not aggression, something older. The stillness of a thing that has already decided it is not afraid of you. Counselor Rith was already on a different part of the station, and she was already transmitting. The files Owen had accessed, and which Rith had quietly been building a proper record of for weeks, went out through 3 independent Dominion oversight networks simultaneously: the conditioning program documentation, the Roman 4 operation orders, the false flag attribution language sitting in a strategic planning file like something ordinary. Rith had been waiting for this. She had known what she was doing when she gave Owen that file access. She had needed someone with clean hands and no political history to pull the thread first, so that when she pulled the rest, no one could say it was a political maneuver. It was a maintenance worker and a welfare complaint, and a statement made out loud in a corridor full of witnesses. That was a different kind of weight. Director Nav denied everything. He denied it well, in the careful way of someone who had been ready to deny it. But the files were already in circulation, and denial of a document that people can read is a different problem than denial of something no one has seen. Admiral Dresser was recalled to Dravari Command within 36 hours. Not punished, not yet, possibly not ever, but removed from the station before she could do anything else that would appear in another file. Nav was placed under Dominion internal investigation. Rith assembled an independent oversight team, and for the first time in the history of the program, the investigation had teeth. The war did not stop. Wars do not stop because one piece of evidence surfaces. The Human Confederation and the Dravari Dominion were still pointed at each other across several sectors, and the collapse of the peace talks had momentum that took more than a corridor statement to reverse. But the justification for the war, the shared history of aggression and counter-aggression that both sides had been using as fuel, began to develop cracks. The Roman 4 question was now public in ways it could not be made unpublic. Solyun was not freed, not immediately. His legal status entered formal review, sapient being versus property versus military asset. The review took time, but the conditioning program was suspended, and no one came to move him to the conditioning chamber again, and his cell door stayed the same, but the weight behind it changed. He had a name now on the official station record. Solyun. Owen had filed it as part of the welfare complaint, under the field for subject identification. Someone had processed it without thinking about it, and now it was in every system on the station. The door still had Asset Draconis 1 on it, but 3 different staff members had quietly stopped using that when they spoke about him. Owen was expelled from the station. Violation of containment protocol, unauthorized file access, interference with a classified Dominion research operation. He had expected it. He packed the small bag of things he had brought to Vel 9, not much, and walked to the docking bay. Counselor Rith found him there. She offered him a position on her oversight team. Civilian witness, technical consultant, the person who could explain in plain language what the maintenance logs and the access records and the timeline of events actually looked like from inside the station. Owen accepted. He did not accept because it was glorious. He accepted because it was the next thing to do, and he had learned that the next thing to do is usually enough. Sergeant Euler gave a recorded statement before she was transporting back to human space. She described what she had witnessed in the corridor. She used plain, factual language, not warm, not forgiving, but accurate. A dragon that could have killed everyone in that corridor, a choice that was made not to. She did not say she was no longer afraid. She said what she had seen was real, and she thought it should be on record. For Euler, that was a very long way to travel. Solyun spent the review period in temporary residency on the station. His cell door was no longer locked. He did not immediately leave. He had nowhere to go, and leaving for the sake of it seemed less interesting than staying in the place where things were still being decided. He thought in the long, quiet hours about what he had not done. He had not burned human worlds. He had not become the weapon Nav had designed. He had chosen that not because revenge was a simple wrong, not because the grief was gone, but because one human had shown him that the shape of a species is not its worst act. That the people who made the decision and the people who fixed the filtration systems were not the same people, and treating them as one thing was the same lie that had been told about his nest. He was still angry. Anger did not go away because you decided not to use it like a weapon. It just became something you carried instead of something that carried you. The night before Owen's transport left, his comms unit chimed once. An anonymous station terminal, no text, one image, small, rendered in simple pixel light, a flame, ember-colored, upright and steady, burning for no reason except that it was burning. Owen looked at it for a long time. Then he put the comms unit in his bag and went to sleep on the docking bay bench and did not dream. On the station, Solyun was awake. He was in the corner of the room he had been moved to, not a cell anymore officially, just a room, the corner closest to the door that Owen used to come through. His eyes were open. Outside the narrow window above him, the stars were very far away, and the sky between them was the same pale, empty color as the sky above Cororoman 4. He was still here. He pressed one claw quietly against the wall, the way he had once pressed it against the glass, and he said something in the old tongue, low and slow, to no one or to everyone who could not hear him anymore. It was not a vow of fire, it was harder than that. It was the sound of a small thing deciding to keep going.